How's it going, good people? This video will be a behind the scenes look of my 2023 Christmas light show. This year I ran about 5,000, a little bit over 5,000 lights. They are all LED, and I'm going to go through pretty much every particular element in the show in addition to the control boxes that I have. Starting out at the furthest most point is the Tune 2 sign. This is the same sign that I've used in years past. I actually created the sign in 2020 when I first did the first year of my light show. This year I actually had to replace the LED strips on the sign. Last year something happened where I put the strips on, but then they worked for a while and then they quit working. And I didn't bother to try to figure out. I just threw something in place, kind of like basically a bug fix, and then kept going. Well, this year I actually diagnosed what happened to it. So if you see where the electrical tape is right there next to the 9, normally there is a cap that goes on the end of these lights. The cap actually comes with it when you buy a controller. That cap had burn marks on it when I was investigating, so I took the cap off, and in addition to the burn marks on the cap, the burn marks were also on the wire. Based on how I had it positioned, the cap was facing in an upward direction like this. And what I think happened is that it rained once, twice, who knows how many times. That cap managed to collect water, and as a result, it shorted out the LED strip, which also resulted in the LED controller for the Tune 2 sign to short out as well. Thus, I didn't have a Tune 2 sign that was actively working. That said, I replaced the LED strip in addition to replacing the LED controller, and everything is working now. The way I have it configured is that it does a 7 color fade, I believe is what it's called, and it just cycles through all the possible colors that it has. This controller actually has the ability to make, I believe, 16 colors with varying intensity. However, I just have it cycling through so that it is obvious what people need to do when they pull up to the show, which is tune their radio to 90.3. Now on the back side of this is an LED controller. And if you don't believe me, it literally says LED controller on there. Now it does have this capabilities of doing other voltages, but I am using it for a 110, on a 110 circuit or 120 circuit. I used electrical tape this year on all of the electrical connections. I haven't had any problems, in addition to using electrical tape instead of that cap on the end there, and it is taped over fairly well. And in addition to using that electrical tape, also pointed the end of the wire in the upwards direction. That way, if rain were to ever hit it, it would not actually sit and be captured by the electrical tape. Instead, it would just ideally hit the tape and just run off and hit the ground. Continuing on, we have the candy canes here. There are 11 in total. The red ones are grouped in 3s. So those 3 are together, those 3, and then 1, 2, and 3 are together. The 2 white candy canes are independent of each other. All of these candy canes are fairly old. I actually upgraded, I believe a couple of years ago, the internals of these, because the white ones had incandescent bulbs in. I took them out and put some string lights inside of them. As you can kind of tell, the plan I think I may do next year is to take those string lights out and put them to use in another element, and then put inside of those maybe some floodlights like these or something else of a standard bulb that go inside of those, so they can be used better and also provide better illumination of those particular candy canes. As you can see, there's also a tree, an actual tree, not a mega tree or mini tree, and I actually have 2 of those, one here, one over there. I put on those trees the it's called this like fencing that you can get from your home improvement store, and I then zip tie or twist tie the lights onto that. So as you see, there's a twist tie right there, and there's several scattered about. I'm actually going to redo the lights on this so that it looks a little bit more organized. I had red lights in years past. However, I never removed the red lights off of this or the other tree setup. So I'm going to actually, when I do take these down, I'm going to take the red lights off, and there will only be white lights going forward. Also here I have the bungee cord. So what the purpose is of the bungee cord is to hold the mesh or the fencing to the tree. right? So at the end of the season, I basically just unhook it, and it's literally like a 2-minute process to align this thing to the tree, put the bungee cords on. I got one at the top and one at the bottom, and then that's it. And so it's very easy to take down and put up. In future years, though, I do plan on adding more lights to pretty much go up here and further up the tree. But right now, the base of the tree seems to be sufficient. Continuing on to the house, we use the same manner for the tree as it's done on the windows. So you got a fencing panel with the lights tied or zip tied to that panel. I do plan on adding maybe another set of lights to each of the panels here because this set only has, I believe, 2 or 3. Yeah, so it has 3 strands that go around, but it's not as intense as the smaller windows up there that have about the same amount of lights, but they wrap around more frequently because they are on a smaller window. So to try to mimic the same look, I'm going to add more lights to these during the off season. Now, people ask, what kind of lights do you use? I use all 120 volts lighting. I don't use any 12 or the 5 volt. And the reason being is because I have experience working with building circuits, and it's easier to, one, it was cheaper to start with the same stuff that I already had, which was the 120 volt lights, and 2, it's easier to stick with a setup that has the same set of circuits all the way across. So if you have 120 volts, use 120 volts for everything. So that being said, I stuck with 120 volts for my entire setup. Do I have any issues with shorting or running in the rain? And the answer is no. Why not? I tape up the ends of my electrical connections. As you see here, this end is covered up in electrical tape. Likewise here and there. And so when you do that, you don't have to, you reduce the chances of shorts happening. Now, what I typically, and I need to do it on this, is to actually, you wrap over the openings in the sockets, but then you wrap around the socket itself to make sure that the end over the socket doesn't come loose, the tape on it, that is, doesn't come loose and expose you to having a short. But pretty much that's how I do that. And there are some screws around the window. I think there's like some up at the top and then there's some on each side. And pretty much I hook this thing onto those screws and they stay in place. Likewise for the ones up there, you can kind of see a nail down there at the bottom from years past. But somewhere up there is a couple other nails that are up there, and those are used to pretty much hang everything on too. Continuing to the next is the floodlights. This is a new addition for the light show this year. I've had floodlights in the past, but they were single color floodlights, and this year I wanted to be able to get multiple colors and wash them onto the house. Thus, I have a red, blue, green setup. And of course, if you are familiar with how the lighting technology works, you use a combination of the red, blue, and green to get red, blue, green, in addition to the secondary set of colors, which includes yellow, purple, and I believe cyan. So I have them all on right now, which at nighttime you would think it would display a white, but it really doesn't blend as well. And I'm assuming because the spacing of the lights, I'm not 100% sure. However, it does give the intended effect of the various colors that I wanted to achieve. Those lights are sitting on a block of wood, more so to elevate them upward towards the house, and in addition to keep them from being directly on the ground. On occasion we will get some rain that may soak, and I emphasize soak, like heavily soak the ground, and for that reason I don't want them sitting directly in water. So I used some scrap wood and elevated those up. And so for those that are wondering, these are just a standard floodlight housing that you would normally mount to a house inside of a junction box. And then I have the 3 lights attached there. So 1 to the cover plate and then 2 to the sides of the boxes. And the reason I did it this way, originally I had them all 3 on the cover plate, but the width of the lights was causing it to shoot off at different angles. Because of that, what would happen is if I wanted to do purple, so blue and red are on opposite sides. And if I wanted to do purple, what would happen is the edges of the blue would show, and then the edge of the red would show, but in the middle you have purple. And so it would look kind of weird. It would kind of look like a Venn diagram where you have red on the far end, purple in the middle, and then blue on the right. And so I was like, okay, something's got to, that can't work. It's got to be a little bit better than that. And granted, it's not perfect, and you'll see that if you go watch some of the videos about the songs, but it is better than what it was when I originally started. By them being relatively on the same plane and same angle, it blends the color a little bit better. So I stuck with this configuration of how the lights are set up. Now you're wondering, how did I do this with one wire? What this is actually trailer wire that is connected to this. So each of this is 4-wire trailer wire. They do have 7-wire trailer wire and 5-wire trailer wire, but this is 4. So you have one color for each. Each wire has one color, and then you have a neutral return because this is a 120-volt circuit. So I think what I did was green is green, yellow is red, blue is brown, and then the neutral is white. So that's how that works. And so that's one of those. I have another one here. This one I kind of added mid-show season to more so brighten up the dark spot of the house that was being missed. So that's why this base looks a little bit different than the others. Next, we have the control box for the floodlights. So what's inside of here is an ammo can. Excuse me, what this is an ammo can, I'm sorry. Inside of here, we have the power that comes into the receptacle or outlet. On this outlet, it does have USB ports. And so the ESP32, which is this thing right here, is plugged into that. That way I don't need to have a power brick inside of this box. I can literally just power everything off of that. In addition to my 120 volts are controlled by an 8-channel relay. These are solid state relays. Granted, right, this year I'm only using 3 of the channels. The intent was to use 6 of the channels. However, I ran into some issue that I wasn't able to easily diagnose. So that said, I switched everything over to using 3 channels instead of the 6. And thus the entire house has to be one color instead of having multiple colors being shined on the house at the same time. Not that big of a deal, but in the grand scheme of things, ideally I wanted to be able to have, let's say, the left side one color and then the right side a different color, or to be able to do some kind of variation in the patterning. However, single color is fine with me. So that said, I also added, so there's a receptacle in there to basically take in the 120 volt that comes in. And in the future, if I ever had something that needed to be switched or something else of that nature, I could do that with this receptacle here. However, at this point, I don't have a need for that. So we'll close that back up. All right, coming over here, these are floodlights that I bought from the home improvement store for last year's show, and I actually bought more red than I did the green and blue. That said, I was like, okay, I got these floodlights. I don't want to just have them for the sake of having them. What can I do with them? And so given that my driveway is here, I can't put lights in the driveway because it is an actively used driveway. We park vehicles there, obviously, in addition to you know, having to repair the vehicles in the driveway as well. That said, I use these floodlights because they have a narrow beam to them to project across over to the garage where the driveway is located. That way, everything as far as the light show goes stays in the yard, and I don't have to run wires across the driveway, risk them getting damaged by the vehicles rolling over them, or risk tripping over them getting in or out of a vehicle. And so these came in use, you know, very useful in that particular scenario, and they did come in one color each. So I was able to tie these existing lights into that gray box. Inside of this gray box are receptacles that I pretty much just made up. And so you have 4 outlets here. This one is not tied into anything, but each of these represents a color, and they all are inside of this box tied to the neutral and utilize the same trailer wire. And this one actually has a kind of like a, it's just a middle circuit, if you will. So that's the control box connected there to that. Then it comes to here, and then it has an out that goes to the next, which then goes to the last light in the series of floodlights. And so it works just the same. Like I say, the floodlights do have a wide beam, and this has a narrow beam, so it can be very focused, but it gives the same effect as the wide beam lights. Also have lights on the porch as well as around the garage door and the tree located on the inside. Starting with the outside here, each of these are 300 lights. The 2 columns and then the garage is 400 lights. We also have lights around the window, and the angling or the flickering of the LED makes it look like they're off, but they're actually on right now. Actually, all of these on. There you go. It looks a little bit better now. That said, though, they all are tied into the show. In addition to the Christmas tree is also tied into the show. It is tied in. Everything in the show, as far as the controllers go, is wireless. It is also using the same controller as the floodlights, a ESP32 running WLED. The Christmas tree actually has 4 dedicated channels, and those 4 channels are tied to about 200 lights per channel. And so the tree is able to be animated and lit up solid and all that other stuff. And it ties in with everything else into the show. You also have the snowman on the front porch. In the daytime, the snowman serves as a, hey, this thing is still running notification or indicator. And then during the actual show, it does turn off because it has a 24-volt transformer on it, I believe, or it has some sort of transformer on it. Because it has that transformer on it, it has a delay in powering on and off. That being said, I don't use it in the show because it takes about a second to a second and a half for it to power on. And that is, well, it can impact the timing and how things look in the show. Thus, I don't use it for that reason. Then last but not least, we have the control box. Now, this is the main control box for the entire show. I did redo the control box internals this year. If you compare this year's behind the scenes video to last year's behind the scenes video, it will look completely different, but it is the same box with the same internals. And then I have, so here is pretty much a trailer wire extension cord, if you will. The intent behind this is that if I ever need to reposition the lights, then I can move them, and if I need a longer cord, plug this in, keep going. All right, so we also have some spare parts here. Got zip ties, because, well, you never know when you'll need more of those. Got more bungee cords for the trees and other areas. And then we also have a bunch of other spare parts, fuses, lights, vampire plugs, you name it. All right, so let's start from the bottom and work our way through. All right, so all of the power, this black wire right here, comes in on this black wire, and there's a hole back in there somewhere that comes into this block. This block then connects to this box here. In this box, we have a GFCI on, yeah, so this is the GFCI, and then that's just another receptacle. The floodlight controller is plugged into this right here. So that way the floodlight controller always has power. It is always on. It is never switched off. This is for the Raspberry Pi. Again, it is always on, never switches off. All right, so from this, we then come to the fuses. Now there's a fuse box, a junction block back there behind everything. All right, and so everything, all the power from here goes to that block back there. And then from that block, we have fuses that go to each of the relays. And so it's kind of difficult to see, but that's what's happening here. So each of these black things are a glass blow fuse. So the glass blow fuse, this is one of them. And so pretty much if a short were to occur, this fuse would blow before destroying the solid state relays. However, I do have backup solid state relays in the event something were to happen. So after the fuses, we then have our solid state relays. Yes, there are 2 different boards, but pretty much they work the same way. And I say there are 2 different boards because these have red indicator LEDs and these have green, but they're still all solid state relays. And I think they are all high level trigger relays, if I'm not mistaken. One may be, yeah, they're all high level trigger and not low level trigger. So whatever you get as far as the relays go, make sure they are the same. That makes configuring everything that much easier. However, you can use high level and low level trigger relays. but you have to do the invert option when you are configuring the relays on your particular setup. All right, so from the relays, the power goes out over and then to each of the sockets here. Now, I have some tape over these 3 sockets, and the reason being is because for some reason they're not wired up correctly. I don't know if it's the socket is loose and needs to be replaced or something else. A wire may have come apart, which I don't think it has. But in either case, I have those as reminders of what I need to diagnose when the off season or after the show season is done for. So then from each of these receptacles, it ties into it has a plug connected to it, and that plug goes to something out in the yard or on the house. And then, of course, likewise, all the neutrals are tied together. They then come back, the neutrals, that is, come back to here, and then that's neutral, that's ground, and all that goes back accordingly. Now, while there are grounds here, the grounds are not ever used. Even with this particular wire, it's never used as it doesn't have any ground because the lights only need the hot and neutral wire. They don't ever have a ground wire. Now, there are some lighting mechanisms that may have a ground wire, but none of mine do. So I can effectively get away without having a ground here. All right, so that encompasses all of the 120 volt stuff. Now, as far as the Raspberry Pi, so you got the power from the Raspberry Pi, which is that brick that comes up and over and plugs in right there. You have the wires here, which all tie into a relay. Each GPIO controls one relay. And then off of this, we have this black cord here, or black connector here, that goes to the FM transmitter that's located over here. The FM transmitter is the very cheap one that you can get. It is plugged into the USB to not only provide power to the transmitter, but to also provide audio to the transmitter. The configuration for the audio is done within Falcon Pi Player. Falcon Player does recognize it as an output device, like a microphone or HDMI. There's another option that is presented in there that will say FM transmitter. And so you set that as your option, and then you plug and you output directly here. There's no need for a sound blaster like a lot of people say, because of the fact this is literally digital audio going from the Pi to the transmitter. This blue wire here serving as the antenna. I could use a longer wire, but this wire here is sufficient. It reaches about 2 to 3 houses away, which is pretty far enough. I mean, you can't, based upon how the street is set up, see my house from that far away. So 2 to 3 houses is sufficient, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I may, in the off season though, reconfigure how this is set up so that it's just not a clob of wire sitting up here at the top like so. One other feature that I wanted to add in the future, but I didn't do at this year, is to utilize a temperature sensor inside of the control box. And so this is a one wire DS1820, I think, temperature sensor, and it plugs into the USB. I did use this USB temperature sensor in another project. However, that project has now been decommissioned, and so I was like, okay, I still got this part. Can I do something with it? And so one thing I wanted to do is to be able to have local temperature data captured by the show and displayed on the light show website. So that is not a feature that's currently implemented, but it is on the future agendas for next year's show. All right, and so this wooden box is basically built out of 2x12s. It is oversized for its purpose. However, in giving it some thought, I'm thinking about extending and adding more outlets to this box, because I have capabilities to put 2 more boxes here, which will give me another total of 8. And then I can put 4 more on the side here between that back and these front plates, which will give me another 4, 8, 12, 16 over there, which then I will have 24 additional sockets, which will give me a total of 48 sockets inside of this box. With those additional 48 sockets, I will need another Raspberry Pi and 24 or 3 channel board relays to be able to accommodate those additional sockets that will be in the box. However, that's a plan that is, well, not necessarily materialized as of yet, but that's something that is to be considered. I also thought about hey, I could just stick another WLED instance on the ESP32 instead of using another Raspberry Pi and accomplish the same thing. Now, the configuration with the Raspberry Pi is a little bit different than that of the ESP, so that's something to consider, but nonetheless, either way, I can still get it to work using either of those devices. So some other things that have come up about the show, I wanted to answer some questions that I often get about the show. One of which is, do I ever plan to use pixels? This seems to be a recurring question or a recurring comment that is made, like, you should add some pixels. And the answer to that is, I'm not going to do that. I have no intentions on doing that. The reason being is, one, because while pixels, they do look cool, they do, they're awesome. I'm not going to say there's something wrong with them significantly. But my biggest concern is I've seen a number of people in the various Christmas lighting groups that have talked about how the pixels have caught fire. And one thought that I personally do not want to try to test out is, if the pixels were to catch fire, would your homeowner's insurance pay out for the damage that they do to your house? I say that, and this came up in a live stream that I did once, and because somebody was like, yeah, they use pixels and so forth, and they asked me why not. And the main reason is, I don't know, pixels are not, from my knowledge, pixels are not certified by like Underwriters Laboratories or any other, even the Chinese equivalent of the Underwriters Laboratories. For that reason, that makes me wonder, well, if your house catches fire for using uncertified devices, would the insurance company pay you out for it? And personally, I don't want to find that out the hard way. I know some people have done it, and they've gotten paid out, but you never know to what extent that the insurance company will or will not pay for something happening to your house. So that said, I don't want to try that out. Second of all, as someone who has done electrical engineering and worked with various or built things, like in college, I did electrical engineering for about 2 years. One thing that I want to stick with is my setup is 120 volts. It has a control circuit, which is the Raspberry Pi and the relays and a couple other things, but everything else is 120 volts. That being said, I don't want to have to mix 12 volts or 5 volts with 120 because you end up with major issues. Now, some people, hey, I got to have this in 12 and I got to have that in 5. Perfectly fine. Do your setup. But I choose to stick with 120. One, because I don't need a power supply to, convert to run my lights. Second of all, the cost of entry to running 120 volt lights is, in my opinion, a little bit lower than to get the 12 volt or 5 volt pixels. Because like one big thing that I notice a lot of people have is that their power supplies go out. And it's like, your power supply went out? It's like, yeah. So now they have to go get another one. And it's not like something you can go to your big box store and pick up. Like, you got to order this thing, and it has to come from overseas or across the country or whatever the case may be, wherever it's located. Me, if something goes out, with the exception of the relays and the Raspberry Pi, I can pretty much get that thing from the big box store. Now, you could also say, yeah, you should just keep spare parts on hand. And I do have a few spare parts. I have a couple extra relay boards and a couple of Raspberry Pis and ESP32s. But pretty much everything else, I don't have to keep it on hand because I can go to the big box store and get it. Another question that comes up is, why do you do the lights? Originally, doing the lights was more so just a project, just to, hey, I want to do something cool, and doing the lights was one of the ways to be able to do that. It has since expanded to not just doing something simple and cool, but it's expanded to, ooh, I can add this, and ooh, I can add this, and ooh, I can add this. And as I'm doing all of these additions and adjustments and so forth, I'm documenting the journey as you see here. This is just one of the many videos that are related to that. But then the other aspect of this is that I do STEM outreach events with my NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers chapter. Being able to talk about this and share this with them is mind-blowing to kids, that, wait, you have these lights that you can control and use technology to be able to do it. A lot of kids, and especially in not necessarily the neighborhood that I live in, but in the city that I live in, have not ever seen anything like this. They've never been exposed to anything like this. Not saying that this is something like revolutionary, but to them is revolutionary because they've never seen it. That said, because it's revolutionary, it's like, okay, you got to do it, and the kids enjoy it. And not only the kids enjoy it, come to find out, the adults enjoy it as well. So you're reaching both old and young in that regard. And I say the kids enjoy it because there's one family that I spoke with last year. The dad and the kid were, coming out, and they were out, and I just like, hey, I see somebody out there. Let me go talk to him. And he's like, yeah, we've been coming around. He was like, they were driving home one evening, I think in 2020 or maybe 2021. He was like, they were driving home one evening and they saw the house and they were like, ooh, that looks cool. Let's go back. And so they doubled back. They came by. They looked at the house and they were, oh, wait. And it's like, ooh, this is cool. And so ever since then, he was like, they would come by at least twice a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, to be able to look at the lights, because more so the kid wanted to look at the lights. This year, a older lady, she said, I posted about it, was like, hey, I got these lights. If y'all want to take a look, come by. The lady posted a response to that and said that she was a 74-year-old woman who is immune compromised. For those of you that do not know, immune compromised meaning that she is very susceptible to getting sick or infections or so forth due to whatever immune health issues that she has. That being said, she was like, because she's immune compromised, she tends to not do things that require being around other people as frequently, like going to like parties and stuff like that nature. That being said, she said that being able to come and see the lights and being able to watch them from her car and so forth created a sense of, a sense of relief, right? That she was able to still be able to participate in an activity or to do an activity that would not necessarily put herself or her health at risk for that reason. And so, it was very encouraging to see that, hey, not only are the kids enjoying it because it's lights, but the adults are enjoying it because of the fact of their various health situations or other circumstances that allow them to participate in different activities and to be able to see things. I did several live streams between Thanksgiving and Christmas. A lot of them were done around the Thanksgiving time frame as far as getting the show ready, because the plan was to have it already done before Thanksgiving, but well, life happens. In doing one of those live streams, several suggestions were made, one of which was to add a current transformer to the primary control box to see how much electricity is being used, because people have asked this, like, how much does your light bill go up by if you were running lights versus not running lights? And I tell people, I typically don't know, but it's not necessarily a lot. Now, in 2020, I did do the calculations for if all the lights were on for the amount of time that they are on, what would it be? And based upon those 2020 rates and the amount of lights that I had in 2020, which was roughly about 2,500, the additional cost to my electric bill would have been about $30, $35. However, this year I ran a little bit over 5,000 lights, and the electric rates have gone up as long with everything else. And so I was like, I wonder if there's a way to do that. And I was like, well, I don't want to add more hardware to this, but I got to thinking, could I do this via software? Thus enter in ChatGPT. I went over to ChatGPT and I gave it the X-Lights sequence file. Now, for those of you that are familiar with it, this is the file that ends in XSQ, not the FSEQ file. So I gave it that, which if you open the XSQ file in a text editor, it's basically an XML file. So I copied that content out, pasted it in ChatGPT, and I told it, hey, I need you to calculate how long each channel is on and give me a duration. ChatGPT went through, it did the calculation. It didn't do it for every channel, but it did do the calculations. I was like, all right, so for this channel, if it is on for, let's say, 90,000 milliseconds, because it spit it back out in milliseconds instead of actual seconds. So 90,000 milliseconds, all right. And so then take that amount, and the channel has this much current draw. Each string of lights, like right here, draws a certain amount of current. On my string of lights, the amount of current that is drawn is listed on the sticker that's on the lights. So I'm able to figure that out. You know, it says 65 watts or 5 watts, whatever the case may be. I can tell ChatGPT, hey, this string has, or this channel has 3 strings, and each string draws 5 watts. 3 times 5, 15, 15 times 90,000 milliseconds, whatever that number is. So then it knows how much current is being drawn for that song. And then I was like, all right, my utility charged this rate for per kilowatt hour. How much does it cost me to run this song? And it gave back an answer. Granted, it wasn't right because it did the math, but the formula that it used was incorrect. But it gave back an answer, and I was able to coach ChatGPT to get through it, and it gave me the cost for that particular channel and that song. So I was like, do I really need a current transformer when I can just plug this into that and it computes? And so one video that you'll see come out in the future is being able to compute the cost per song. For my particular show, that will probably be an added value, in my opinion, because the people that now come to the show, in addition to being able to pick their song, they can now see how much electricity that song requires and how much it costs to run that song. I think that's a value add for a lot of people. It may not be useful in a lot of contexts, but to see that that information is available and that information can be displayed to the user, it's like, wait, we know how much this song costs? And it's like, ooh, we probably should give them a donation or something of that nature, right? But to be able to do that, you know, I think it's a cool idea. So that'll be a video in the future. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and follow so that when that video does come out, you'll be able to see it. Let's see, what else do we have? Now this year I did 5,000 lights, and some people say, well, 5,000 lights, that's a lot. And to be honest with you, to me, it's not. In particular, because I know there's another house in the city, not too far from where I'm located, that does 17,000 lights, but he does pixels and not traditional LEDs, Christmas AC lights like I do. That being said, yes, I will be getting more lights. I'm probably going to stop somewhere before the 10,000 mark. And the reason being is because, like, the more stuff you have, the more places you got to store it. And I know some people rent out storage sheds. I'm not on that level of trying to rent out storage sheds just to hold some Christmas lights. No offense to anyone that actually does do that, though. That said, though, yes, I'll be adding more lights. I'm not sure how many I'm going to add, but I will be adding more lights as these after Christmas sales kick in and they're, you know, things that they have become discounted. They're asking, well, what about the software? What does the software look like that you use? And that'll be a separate video because, well, the hardware is long enough and the software has a whole lot to it. The light show that I have actually is interactive. It is interactive. It has a lot of intricacies. It connects to multiple systems, including the website that runs the show. I mean, the website where people make their requests, the National Weather Service to get data, the Falcon Player to get data, and it does a lot. I'll put it that way. That being said, though, yeah, that software and the whole infrastructure of the networking aspect of things will be a separate video. So if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and follow. As always, please give me a thumbs up if you enjoy this type of content. If you have any comments or questions about the light show and my particular setup, leave a comment down below. I did get a request to discuss how to go from Lightorama to a Falcon Pi Player with a custom build setup. So that will probably be a series later on at some point. Be sure to subscribe and follow so you'll see and know when that comes out. That being said, I thank you for watching. As always,